Hey guys, Julian here, and today I'm going to be talking to you about how to make deep micro house in the style of Dimmish, Rossi, and Artmann. Now, I'm going to be talking about just some very broad terms in terms of this style. I'm really showing you the style that these three artists embody. As usual, you can get the full project files, samples, MIDI, presets, everything like that from this video that you just heard in the intro is available at the top of the description on my Bandcamp for just $5. And if you're a patron on my Patreon, check there because it's already available. And yeah, let's dive in. Alright, so the first thing that we have going on up here, we're at 127 BPM, is this chord stab. So the way this chord stab works is we're using this sound. So you can hear the sound already has some movement in it, and that really helps. Like if you can get a stab like this, where it's a sample that has some type of movement, you know, it's not just but it's got like kind of a little thing already happening in there, it's gonna sound really good. That's a big part of this sound. Essentially what we're doing here is we have that, and then you can see I'm using the release here. So we have like these shorter notes, and then you just get a little bit of that like kind of at the end of it, that modulation that was in the sample already. But then on top of that, we also have a low pass filter here, and on the low pass filter, we're using an envelope. So here's without the filter, and then with it. So you can hear, you know, it really helps to keep this chord, one, kind of like tighter and more controlled, you know, it just feels more kind of clean and under control in the mix this way. But also, you know, we're just taking the sound and really making it our own this way. So I recommend, if you're working with a sample chord stab like this, playing around with the filter and the envelope on the filter can create some really interesting sounds. And then we just have like a short reverb here, and then some drum bus to fatten it up a bit, and then finally just a high pass filter cutting out the low end. And that's it for that first chord stab. And the only other thing I'll talk about with that one is just, you can see in the MIDI, if you notice, in this little break here, it plays less notes. It's just those two, and then when we get over here, you get the full. So if you're doing your arrangement like this, you know, having this sound play in the break, but just having it be like a lot less busy, it's gonna help a lot, because if you don't have this in the break, it feels a bit flat. And then when you get over here, all of a sudden there's this chord stab. So yeah, just having it play in the break but with less notes is a really good way to make this still play through the full arrangement, but without it just being like the same thing the whole way through. And yeah, then we have this FM chord. Which, as you can see, is not actually FM. I had started with FM on this one, and I ended up moving it to analog. But what we have here is, you can see we have a square wave and a saw wave inside of analog, and then we have this low pass filter here, which, if you notice, there's automation on that, but then we also have an envelope. So you're getting the pluck right at the start of the sound from the envelope, because you get that. But then as the sound goes on over time, then it opens up. So it's kind of like using two different modulations to really bring the sound to life. And it's a subtle thing, you know, you'd think it would be a very simple thing to just have it go like that. But you actually have to go in there and get the envelope and then do the automation like this. And then we have the amp envelope set like that. And then we just have a bit of vibrato in unison. If I turn off the vibrato, you'll notice it's a lot just more interesting and more textured sounding when you do use the vibrato on it, and then the unison just makes it sound really big. Then we just have some chorus and a short reverb for some space. And then you can see we just have some saturation happening, as well as a bit of a high pass filter. And that is it for that FM chord. And that one also just plays once in the break. Then we have this pad, which is just in the break, and it sounds like this. So you can hear it's just this nice, deep, very analog sounding rising pad here. The chord this is playing is just B minor. That's the key we're in. That's the same chord that chord stab I just showed you is playing, as well as that one up top. But yeah, so it's just kind of like this long B minor that plays throughout the break. And then you see like, so it's building the whole way through. I'll show you the automation on that. And then it goes down. And then we just get a bar to kind of breathe. And then the drop comes. So if you're making an element like this, like you want to have that pad go through the break, it works really well. You know, it sounds really good. You just have to make sure you give like a moment, like that one bar stop, and then the drop, versus just having it play all the way up to the drop. It's gonna not really be as impactful as when you have this like moment of pause. And then for the sound with this one, so this actually is an FM chord. What's happening here is this is made using a saw wave, but then we're doing FM here from a sine wave, which is an octave down and it's detuned, actually 2 octaves down, excuse me, and it's detuned, and then another sine wave, which is an octave down from the saw wave. So yeah, it's like, we're creating this sound where it sounds like a saw wave, but you'll notice it has just like a slightly different texture to it. It's not exactly a saw wave. And here, this really translates to, honestly, this to me just sounds like a very analog saw wave compared to like the standard saw wave you would get just out of operator. But yeah, so like, I definitely recommend that. Like if you're trying to make pads, you know, of course if we just use basic saw waves and square waves every single time, it's going to be a bit boring. But if you can do stuff like this, where you can take a saw wave and use FM or use whatever style of synthesis to try and make it, you know, just a bit more exciting and a bit different texturally, it's going to do a lot for your track. And then we just have a low pass filter on that, which is being automated throughout the break. That's what's creating the rising effect. And yeah, then we just have some chorus and echo and reverb. So pretty much just giving it a ton of space. You know, you just want this to be super smooth. And then we just have a high pass filter. And yeah, that's it for the pad. Then we have the main hi-hat. And this is made with 2 layers. So we have this one, which this is of course sort of like the main thing that you're hearing. You know, it's just a shorter 909 style hi-hat. And then we have a shaker underneath it. And you don't even necessarily hear the shaker. Like you're hearing it, but you don't hear it and say, oh, there's an obvious shaker here in the mid-range, and then there's a 909 hi-hat in the high end. It doesn't really work that way. But what this does is, you can see if I turn this off, the main hi-hat on its own is a bit, it just doesn't have like the body to it. You know, you need like a ch. And then you can hear when I bring that in, all of a sudden, the groove is going to work together really well. So that's a big thing here, is like, you know, it's all about how these sounds work inside of the groove and how they contribute to the groove as well. So like, even just not having that in there, the groove isn't as powerful because we don't have that. So that's just something to keep in mind. Like these drum sounds, yes, it's about creating like a fat hi-hat and all that, but it's really about serving the groove of the track with fat sounds. And then on that groove, we just have a very tiny amount of saturation. I'm trying to go lighter with the saturation because the thing is like, you know, you can either turn your sound up a lot with saturation and then turn it down later and then kind of just have these tracks where like you have everything at -10, or you could just saturate a little bit less now, but keep everything and just let it breathe and be really fat as it is. And that's kind of the idea that we're doing here. So you can see it's just not that much saturation. And also usually I would have this in a group with a bunch of other hi-hats. You notice it's just kind of on its own. But yeah, then we have the bass line. So we're in B minor. You can hear this is just a simple repetitive bass line in the key of B minor. So we have like B, D, which is the minor third, E, which would be the 4th, a G down there, which would be the 6th, I want to say. And then just back to B. So really, really simple notes, but it's just like this really groovy, repetitive thing. And it's especially like the way that this is grooving with the kick. And the way it's kind of bouncing off of that. So, for the sound on this one, this is made using operator, but you can see we're not using any FM, because we're using this FM algorithm. You also notice while I have this open, that we have the velocity set 100% to the volume, so it's like, you notice that little nuance there between the one note being a little bit quieter that actually adds a lot of groove to the track because you're getting that like da-da. You know, and if we're thinking of this as just like another percussion element, essentially, you know, the velocity can impact the groove for sure. And then we just have a saw wave, actually a little bit of a square wave. Because if you put a saw wave and a square wave together, the idea here is that they're both very harmonically rich sort of waveforms, but when you put them together, like the saw wave kind of has its harmonic content, the square wave has its harmonic content. When you put them together, you get the best of both. So that's kind of the idea. We just get this really full sounding thing, and then we're putting it through a low pass filter here. So here is without that. And then with it, you can see the filter has an envelope on it, which is just making it kind of plucky. And yeah, then we just have a bit of drum bus, just making this really fat on its own. And then I have a compressor to sidechain into the kick, even though it doesn't really play too much at the same time as the kick. You know, you still just want to have it kind of fit into the groove there a little bit more. And then we have the kick, which is 2 layers. So we have this one. And this one. So you can see we're just using EQ3 here to layer these together, where we have one just doing the low end and then one just doing the mids and highs. And really what this comes down to is like a lot of times, you know, you might have one kick sample that has really good mid-range and high end and one that has really good low end. But, you know, if you have either one of those on their own, it doesn't really like have that full sound like you want. So this is just a really simple way to split them and get the best of both, because this kick 2 here has a really good mid-range and high end. And this kick had a really good low end. And then you can see, the key here is you just have to make sure you zoom in and get these transients lined up. Like you can see it, where the actual punch of the kick is. But I'll show you, like, even if I move this just a little bit over, all of a sudden that messes up the whole kick. So you really got to make sure you line those up right. It's not going to sound right if you don't do that. And then we just have a saturator. Again, we're using a little bit less saturation, just letting this really fat kick come through on its own with what's already there, but just with a little bit to excite it. And then on the groove of kick and bass, so again, we're trying to do like not too much processing here, because the kick and bass are already pretty fat on their own. We just need a little bit of glue. So here's without the saturator. And then with it. So you can hear not even really the most noticeable thing, because you don't need it. They're already sounding pretty solid on their own. But it just gives that little kind of like extra glue there, I should say. And then we also have this high pass filter, which is just in the break, since we just had the bass line playing. And then you'll notice the bass line like really disappears at the end there. And same deal as with the pad. Then we get a bar with nothing, and then it comes back louder than it was before. And yeah, then we have all of these background hi-hats, which sound like this. So, first we have these two, which you can hear are playing off of each other. Just like a simple hi-hat and a shaker there, but just creating that constant, like that kind of rhythm. Then we have this one, which is actually just this hi-hat sample. But then what I've done in here is I've actually put it through a bandpass filter. So we're getting this like constantly changing sound as you hear it move around the filter sweep. And you can see I just have a bit of an LFO on that. It's like this random LFO, so that it's never going to be in exactly the same place twice. And this just adds some nice like background movement into the track. And then we just have this live shaker. And yeah, so these again are just kind of playing on their own. The thing is like, if they already sound really good, we don't need to do a whole lot of processing to these. Like, if you just find like really high quality sounds, that was really the emphasis with this video, was I was really trying to just find really good sounds that aren't going to need a whole lot of processing and can just sound good on their own. And that's the idea here. And then we have this extra percussion, which is kind of the same deal, except we do have a tiny bit of processing on this. So again, it's just all these background percussion sounds. Now this one is really good to highlight just how much you need to have, because I think it can be kind of a misconception. Like, people think like, oh, you just need like one little percussion, one hi-hat, and then a clap and your main hi-hat and you're good. But you can see how much stuff is going into it, you know? And when you're playing these on their own, like just this is a very intense groove. So then you add that with all these other intense grooves. And you can see how this kind of a track would start to come together, you know? Now these are all pretty much samples, except for, you can see this one is the zap sound. They're actually made with FM synthesis. So what it is it's a saw wave, and then it's just got FM from 2 sine waves after it. And I think this is pretty cool, because usually when you hear these, it's just like a saw wave or a square wave or something like that. But doing the FM gives it like a more interesting sort of texture and character. So it's kind of like, you know, just a little bit more fresh of an idea with it. You can see we have the pitch envelope. That's what creates the zap. And then we also just have this filter on, even though it's not doing anything. And then on the group of those, there's just a little bit of drum bus. So here's without it. And you can hear why we do that. You know, it really does help to make all these percussions. Like, it's almost like these are all meant to come together as just like one layer, essentially. And it's the same thing with those hi-hats I just showed you too. Like, I think of this kind of as one thing. So the drum bus can help when you have all these percussions like this that are more mid-rangey, to kind of make them feel more like one sort of vibe. And then we have the clap. You know, just a nice, punchy, quick clap like this. Got some drum bus on that. We have these bongos. But you'll notice these are kind of more like... Like, the idea behind these is, like, all these other percussions and hi-hats and stuff are constantly playing. Like, it just keeps going and going and going. And these are meant to be more spaced out. You only get them one time every bar. So it's just a little bit more, like, kind of contrast to the other elements. And that's what adds depth to your track. And then on these, we just have a bit of echo and some drum bus. And yeah, and then the other stuff down here... I'll show you the vocal atmospheres in a second, but these things, these 3 layers are really just like the transition layers, you know, like we have like the snare building through here, and you'll notice the snare, it never just goes like building up like that. Like, it is a build snare, but we need to make sure it's not going to be an EDM build snare. So basically the way that you do that it's just by playing with, like, only having a few notes. And then you just add more notes as it goes on. So, like, we're literally just starting with... You know, rather than starting with do, just have less notes there. You know, it's kind of like saying less in a conversation. Like, it's the same kind of idea here. And then as it goes on, we get more notes. And it's still really, like, just putting this inside of, like, an EDM build-up, it's still, like, way smaller than that, but it feels huge because you've been building and building up to this moment. And yeah, so we got that. That's just going through some drum bus. We have this crash here, which you can hear does, like, that. I experimented with making this last one a little shorter, too. I feel like that just kind of gives it more nuance and makes it feel a little bit more human. And then we just have this short sweep, which is just some white noise. Yeah, and then you can see we've got a bandpass filter, just automating there. It's got some reverb and a high-pass filter. And yeah, so like the transitional elements, you're not going to use too many in this style of a track. You know, of course, it's not going to be like reverse crashes every few minutes and all that kind of stuff. But this stuff is going to be important. If you don't have this stuff, it's going to feel too minimal. You don't want to be too minimal. The idea behind like minimal house or micro house is like it's just as minimal as it needs to be while still having enough stuff for you to sink your teeth into. And the last thing down here would be these vocal atmospheres. So what it is this is meant to be kind of like a contrast between like how this one is just like one word, and then this one goes. I kind of chop that up. I'll turn off the reverb so you can hear it. It's like meow meow meow, but I took that. that was just going bow, bow. So I took that one note and just pitched it down a little, and then we made that little phrase. And yeah, these are just really about that like contrast between these, where we have one that's more of just like talking, monotone, and one that actually has like a cool little melody to it. And then we get into here, of course, you only have the melody one. But yeah, these just add some nice flow to the background of the track. I think they make it quite a bit deeper. As this is deep house just as much as it is minimal and micro house. So yeah, thank you so much guys. That is going to be it for this one. I hope you enjoyed. As always, make sure to like this video as well as subscribe. And let me know what you think of this video in the comments. Like I said in the beginning, you can get this full project file, samples, MIDI, presets, everything like that from this video. It's available at the top of the description. This is a really great way to support me if you guys are enjoying these videos as well. And yeah, thank you so much guys, and I will see you tomorrow with another video.